Well, here we are at the end of our Section 2 preparations. We've talked about a heart prepared for theology, the balance between doing theology in the flesh versus theology in the spirit. We've talked about a mind prepared for theology, how we want to abandon the extremes of a faith-only theology, which is a fideistic theology, or a reason-only theology, a rationalistic theology, and we want to kind of pull the two together in a faith-seeking understanding sort of theological method. And so here's what I want to do. I want to conclude this section, this part of preparations, with just a little teaching of my own, a few things that I've learned over the years to kind of help keep my mind and my heart in check as I approach a theological task. So when it comes to being properly prepared for theology, I kind of follow these three little steps: pray, read, and discuss. Now this likely is going to come across more formally than my actual process, right? But I want to talk through it a little bit, and I hope that you'll get the picture, what I mean when I think through pray, read, and discuss. So when I say step one is just to pray, I would always say that theology should begin and end with prayer. This literally talking with God, right? Theology should always begin and end with prayer, because here's the thing. There's a couple things that prayer communicates, right? Prayer communicates that my desire to not do this without God, right? I don't want to do this alone. I know myself better than anybody else on this whole entire planet. I know my own pride. I know my own selfishness. And I do not want to go about studying God without God being in the conversation. So I want to pause and I want to pray. I do not want to do this without God. Secondly, prayer communicates my need to do this with God, right? The very act of prayer is a confession that not only do I not want to do this without God, that I cannot do this without God. I am utterly dependent on His help. I am forever limited by my own humanity. In my opinion, we would be absolutely crazy to deep dive into theology in any capacity without submitting ourselves to the very subject that we're studying. So we start first with prayer. Second step, I say, is read. And we'll see more of this through our method of theology as we get into class and go a little bit deeper in some of the other disciplines. But even here in preparation, we need to be well read. We need to read broadly. Here's my statement. Reading broadly helps us to fertilize our brains for good theological growth. Think about what I'm saying here is that reading helps us to break up the hardened ground. It sifts out the things that are hurtful or damaging, like rocks and thorns, the things that would, the ideas that would cause us difficulty. Man, reading begins to sift those things out, and reading exposes us to a more complete theological picture. So if all we do is read one or two simple opinions or directions or theologians or thoughts on a particular subject, we're not seeing the whole entire picture at all. We're not even close to being exposed to the full breadth of the topic. But if we read a bunch of opinions and a bunch of different theologians, but everybody that we read or every opinion that we read or study is of the same background or agrees on the subject, then I would even say we're still not seeing the whole picture. We're not reading broadly enough. We need to read about theological subjects from people that we disagree with and who disagree with us, right? Not necessarily because we want to change our minds, but rather in order that we might be able to see a more complete picture. For example, this is why we study world religions and world cultures, right? It's good for us, not because we're hoping to convert to a different theological or faith tradition. Rather, what we're trying to do is understand what's going on, because reading broadly helps us to fertilize our brains for good theological growth. This is both internal to the Bible. We need to read broadly in our Bibles. We need to study deeply, right? But we also, external to the Bible, whatever subject we're wanting to study, we need to read broadly so that we're exposed to a great deal of information. So that's first step was to pray. Second step was to read. Third step, again, is to discuss. This is like my last step in preparing for a theological dive into something, is to take the subject, the topic, and to discuss it with trusted people who are already in my trusted theological circles. So often these are my peers, these are fellow pastors. When I was a missionary overseas, these were fellow missionaries. Sometimes this is professors, people that I've studied under or with, people that I've learned from. But doing this discussion, it really helps us do kind of two things, I think. First, it helps keep my motivations in check. Like if I'm preparing my heart and my mind for theology, these people know me super well. Like these are people that are already, as I mentioned, in my trusted theological circles, and they already have permission to ask me the hard, personal questions about my motivations. Am I just trying to prove somebody wrong, or am I being selfish, or is this just feeding my ego? Is this a reaction or an overreaction to something hurtful in my life, right? These are the people that are going to ask those things, but often what happens isn't necessarily an uncovering of a sinful behavior in my life. Rather, it's an affirmation, like, hey, this is a really good thing. Like you have a lot of experience and interest in this topic. I think it's really good for you to study and to go deep into, right? And so often this discussion is a really helpful thing. So it kind of helps keep our motivations in check, but it also, like I said, it kind of the other thing that I really believe that it does is it helps me clarify my goals. Right? If I'm going to deep dive into a theological subject, when I begin to discuss this with other people and they begin to ask some of these clarifying questions, it often introduces unknown layers. Again, these are people that I already know, that I already trust, and I'm asking them for help and for insight to help me understand and clarify what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And so what's happening is they're asking questions from different perspectives. And man, this really helps me clarify what I'm doing, what I'm seeking, the goals that I'm going after. So I discuss it. So again, think through this three-step process. I pray and I read and I discuss. And again, what often happens is now I just kind of do a little bit of this naturally. I don't necessarily go, hey, I'm going to study this, and so first I got to pray, and then I'm going to read a bunch, and then I'm going to discuss. But rather in my normal, natural rhythms, this is what it looks like to be properly prepared for theology from me, right? This is how I take pains to practically prepare my heart and my mind for theology. So if I'm preaching, and I'm preaching almost every week, 50 times a year or so that I'm speaking, and so if I'm preaching, I want to follow some of this process as I study, as I take the Word of God and I open it up and I begin to seek and to read and to pray. I want to understand. I want to ask God to illuminate by His Spirit, to show me His truth that's already there. Right? But I want to read not just commentaries, but I want to read the Bible, and I want to read other commentaries and the way other pastors have communicated these truths. And I also just kind of want to discuss it. I have a short list of people that I talk to almost every single week as I'm preparing to teach and preach, right? Just to run ideas. I have my own elder board in my own church. And I talk to them about, hey, this is kind of where I'm going with things, and this is what we're studying right now, and this is the direction, and I want to get their input, because this is how I believe that we can be properly prepared to do theology, both in our hearts and our minds. So I hope this second part, preparations, has been helpful to you. We'll close this out with a short discussion board assignment and a section quiz. After you've completed all of that, we'll jump into the third major section where we're going to spend the majority of the rest of our time. And that section is called procedures. And we'll begin to kind of unpack and put some meat behind our process and start building it in a really healthy way.